Hi, Beth. Thank you for
Hi.
joining me today. I'm excited to have you here on Spoonful of Spite. I have followed your content on Instagram and just really loved it so much. And I'm so grateful that you were able to join us today to talk about some of the topics around nutrition that we haven't explored yet. So I give you a chance to introduce yourself to our audience and let them know all about who you are.
Sure. So I'm Beth Rosen. I'm a registered dietitian. I've been one for 30 years. I'm the owner of Beth Rosen Nutrition, and I also work with Oshi Health, which is an online or telehealth GI company,
Mhm.
as the medical education lead for the registered dietitian. So it's an excellent place to go if you don't have GI help because it's an integrated care team. And I, pride myself on focusing on all sorts of GI issues. Of course, things like IBS,
Mhm.
reflux, but gastroparesis especially.
Mhm.
And I also come to the GI space with a lens of eating disorders, disordered eating, body image issues, and weight inclusive approach to care.
Mhm. Which we love that more and more experts are taking such a wholesome approach to patients and not, just pointing us in one direction or the other, really trying to see the patient as an individual and where their needs are and maybe where they need a little bit more or a little bit less. And just that inclusivity way of looking at things. It feels so new, even though it really shouldn't be, but we just appreciate more and more people like yourselves in the space being so vocal and being advocates for that type of care. So just thank you for that right at the beginning because I'm just really appreciative of everything that you do and how you approach patients.
Well, I'm glad to, provide a space and, not only do I do it myself, but I certainly put it out there to other dietitians that this is a really
Mhm.
great way to care for patients. And I've seen a lot, like you've said, a lot of other dietitians sort of come to this realization that a body size isn't a health condition and all
Mhm.
bodies deserve respect and equitable healthcare. So, yeah, that's the basis of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, it sounds so, like, simple when you say it, but it's not always practiced, so we
Mm,
really
true,
appreciate that, and
true.
it's a perfect, start to the beginning of this conversation where, healthy looks different for everyone, and it looks different especially for chronic illness. I had a conversation another conversation about, weight and malnutrition and weight and gastroparesis and how, you know, what you look like and maybe where your level of nutrition is estimated or guessed based on what you look like coming into that conversation too. So I definitely would love to hear your take on, how that looks different for everybody, especially those with GI diseases.
Yeah, that's the hard part. If you go into a practice where they're going to weigh you and then they're going to use your BMI as a measurement, that's really not a lot of information. BMI doesn't
Yeah.
take into account your muscle mass, your gender, your age, right? Your race. And it's really
Mhm.
not a great tool, and yet it's still used, which is unfortunate. I think
Mhm.
what's really helpful though is to consider if weight is lost. How
Yeah.
much weight is lost based on percentage of the size of the body, right? So that puts everybody sort of as an equal standard, like how much weight have you lost based on what you weighed before? And if a
Mhm.
percentage of your body you lost, like that can speak to malnutrition.
Yeah.
Certainly, just talking to a patient about what they're eating on a daily basis, we can know that like that's just not enough, especially for people with gastroparesis, right? In most
Yeah.
cases, they're not eating enough. And because it's hard,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So no matter what the body size, I'm always worried that my patients with gastroparesis have some malnourishment. So when I can, I get them on a multivitamin just as an
Mhm.
insurance food, just
Yeah.
to get
Yeah.
make sure they're still getting nutrients if it's possible. And liquid form might be better than a pill form for some.
Mhm.
Or taking gummies might be helpful because it dissolves easier than,
Mhm.
taking a capsule, depending on
Yeah.
where on the spectrum of gastroparesis someone falls.
Yeah. No, and that's a really good point. Like, I know for me, since I still rely on not IV nutrition, but IV medication and IV hydration, that for me personally, I get my multivitamins through the IV therapy. So, I already take enough, oral meds as it is to kind of push the bounds of how well I'm going to absorb any of them. So, I know that that was, like, one of my first lines of defense going into any sort of nutrition therapy, that was one of the first things that they did, so it's always appreciated to know that was a good good choice to
Yeah, and when
that
that's an
everybody did.
option, yeah,
Mhm.
and when it's an option, when it's accessible to you and you can do
Yeah.
that, and whether or not it's if you can afford it or if it's covered by insurance, or if there are
Mhm.
places that do the infusion therapy, like, that's wonderful if you have access to it, right?
Yeah.
So, the hope is always that the doctor that, you're working with understands your condition and knows what kind of tools you're gonna need in your toolbox to feel good.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I remember seeing old notes not too terribly long ago because the doctor that was maintaining my IV care, changed, and there were some old notes talking about like we tried to get her off therapy and it was terrible. Like, do not do that again, because patient was miserable. The notes were very interesting, and I'm like, well, at least they heard me what I said of how I was feeling, and to see that validated, like in the notes, it made me giggle though how it was written. It was like, this failed. We failed and don't do that
Yeah.
again.
But that's great to find practitioners with, an easygoing ego where they'll
Mhm.
write like this intervention did not work, and so we're putting it on the list of
Yeah.
do not do that. And that
Mhm.
keeps you safe, right? So that if you end up someplace else and you send over your notes, the next practitioner knows what to do, what not
Exactly.
to do, and hits the ground running with, an intervention that you haven't already tried.
Yeah, and I think especially around, like, nutrition therapy that we all know that we don't get enough of. I say that all the time, and you guys probably do too, that is something, especially around the food fears and disordered eating patterns and all the things that we know exist that we might not talk about. And honestly, it might not fit for some people. Like, some people may never feel the heaviness of these, I'll say, a little bit more unhealthy patterns that come from having a digestive disease. And it can make things very complicated, but when you're going to somebody who doesn't understand or maybe never saw your past notes to say that we tried this, maybe this isn't the place to start, that can be really helpful for the next person going forward. I've seen a lot of dietitians, and thankfully they were all listened to me as I was, telling them what I needed and what I had tried, but they really took that and didn't go, well, this didn't try before, but I wanna see how you do with it, so I'm gonna put you on this therapy, and, like, even though you're telling me it doesn't work, like, that does
Mm,
not instill trust in
no.
that clinician.
No, that's not how you do it. Like, you don't say, "Oh, well, that clinician maybe didn't do it right, or let's try it again."
Mhm,
And maybe in some cases it's worth trying again because maybe after a conversation wasn't done correctly. The provider
mhm,
wasn't a GI dietitian and didn't know the nuances of the specific dietary intervention. So maybe it's worth trying because there are people who have come to me not necessarily for gastroparesis but for other disorders.
mhm.
And yes, they went through a dietary intervention, and when we review it, that wasn't it. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's doing it again, but doing it a different way or the right way, right?
Yeah, I remember years ago, I had somebody just say, "Just eat more fruits and vegetables," and I was like,
Oh gosh,
thank you. Never
yeah.
thought of that for my health, but somebody who doesn't have that education might think like healthy equals fruits and vegetables or healthy equals this. And for patients with digestive diseases, especially those of us with gastroparesis, you can't just like go gnaw on a carrot. I love carrots. I love raw carrots. My grandma used to tell me that I was going to turn orange as a kid because I ate so many dang carrots. They were my favorite
My
vegetable.
son did turn
And
orange.
oh my god,
He did.
oh
He had
my
a little, like,
gosh.
orange mask across his face, and he was little. I was like, "Okay, time
Oh,
to cut back on the
oh my
carrots."
goodness. I feel like he and I need to talk about how many carrots we ate in that point. I wanna know who ate more. But I loved that, and I loved vegetables, and I still to this day, like, I would choose, like, a salad over cake, if I had those options unrestricted, I would always choose the vegetable, and I think some of that comes with that I missed vegetables for all those years, but,
Yeah.
you know, the idea of that is healthy and the foods that are healthy don't always translate into healthy when you have gastroparesis, and sometimes you just need to take what works. But as we had talked the first time about some different ideas of what we wanted to touch on today, that there are ways that you can incorporate fruits and vegetables into your diet safely and what that might look like. And also that if you're not eating fruits and vegetables, it doesn't mean that you're not doing the healthy thing for your body. So
Yeah.
it's like a two-part thing there. It's like you're not
Yeah.
really doing the bad thing here, but this is how, if you feel comfortable trying it, we might start incorporating them into your diet.
Yeah. I think first people have to recognize that healthy is a subjective term, right? You might
Yes.
see the influencers and the whomevers all over social media talking about protein maxing and fiber maxing and all these things, right? That if somebody
Yep.
with gastroparesis try to do that, they are going to vomit, right?
Oh,
If
yeah.
you fiber max, you're going to get a Bezoar. You can't do
Mhm.
it, right? So that's not healthy. If you get a Bezoar or
Yeah.
you vomit, that's not a healthy behavior to come out of an intervention, right? So what's
Yeah.
healthy for people with gastroparesis is to find foods that allow them to maintain weight, maintain their nutrition
Mhm.
status, right? Yes, it would be nice to have enjoyment. We get there with some things, right? We
Mhm.
find ways to do that, but really to try to advance a diet if possible when the disease sort of moves around, right? Because gastroparesis is not a static disease, so you have good days and bad days. And so, what do
Mhm.
you eat on the good days so that if you do have a bad day, you've gotten nutrition in, and so a bad day
Yeah.
can be a lot lighter. And that's what healthy is for someone with gastroparesis. What that looks like food wise is going to be completely different for every single person that walks
Yes.
into my office, right? So when you mention fruits and vegetables, yeah, you can't sit down to a salad because it's going to make you sick. So that's not
Mhm.
healthy for you. I can't sit down to eat like, onions and tomatoes because onions would just knock me out. I can't eat them. Right. So
Yeah.
everybody has their things that they can and can't do and what's going to make them feel good and not feel good. But when it
Mhm.
comes to fruits and vegetables and gastroparesis, there are ways to eat some of them. Right. And I think the key to that is particle size. I know people don't think in
Yes.
those kind of terms, but particle size is how big the piece of food is as it goes into
Mhm.
you. So, as we know with gastroparesis, the stomach isn't doing its job, right? The muscles, the involuntary muscles are supposed to be like squeezing like this, right? And breaking everything up.
Mhm.
And they're not doing that, right? They're either not doing it
Yeah.
hard enough or they're not doing it fast enough and they're not doing it, right?
Mhm.
And so what we can do is do that mechanical action outside the body before the food enters the body, right? So we can puree, we can mash, we can chop, we can
Mhm.
break things down, make the particle size smaller because that's what the stomach does, right? In digestion, when food enters the stomach, it might enter like in a full bite. Some people don't chew well, right? It might enter in a full bite. By the time it leaves the stomach and goes into the small intestine, it's about like 2 millimeters of a food product. But so if we can break it
Wow.
down like that before it gets to the stomach doesn't have to work that hard. So then just the
Yeah.
digestive juices can do their work and then send it on its way, right?
Mhm.
So using a blender and having smoothies or making pureed vegetables or chopping things real small before you put them in your mouth when you go to a restaurant. That's really helpful so that you get to enjoy some of those foods
Mhm.
and not have to miss out on them, right?
It's so simple, right? Like, you break
It
that down,
sounds
talk about
simple.
particle size, it's like the
Mhm.
concept is so simple. And I think I said this to you the first time we had talked about some different ideas where I'm like, "Why isn't that just, like, talked about?" Why instead of just saying, "Go on a liquid diet," or, "No, you can't have that ever again. That's not
Right.
something that you can eat." It's like, well, maybe I can't eat the raw apple, but maybe I can cook it down myself and make applesauce. And maybe I can make or like chunky apples and like that like apple pie filling consistency.
Mhm.
Maybe for some people they can do that, but they can't do raw, or maybe they can't do like the apple pie filling, they need it in applesauce. It's like there are ways to
Mhm.
incorporate food into your life, and it still might not work for you. Maybe that is just a food, like, I love applesauce. I again, it's another food for me that I always had as a kid and still use as a low snack for me when my blood sugar is low, because I can tolerate it in my stomach, so it's a good quick carb, and my stomach accepts it without too much volatility afterwards, and it's like, we talk about these restrictive diets and how we don't want to encourage them, right? Because too restrictive of a diet can unintentionally have consequences. But when you leave a physician's office saying, well, what the heck do I eat after this diagnosis? It's almost like you're just immediately put into the tightest restrictive diet ever without all these nuances. Okay, you can never eat an apple again. Well, please explain that to me. Like, what does that mean? I can't eat the skins? Can I There was a while I wanted a raw apple so bad, like, it's gross, but I would cut it up, I would chew it a bit, and I just spit it out.
Yeah, and so,
I
like,
just wanted that
in the eating
consistency.
disorder world, that's disordered, right? To chew and spit,
Yeah.
it's a disordered
Mhm.
behavior, but in the gastroparesis world, it's a way to get flavor without the
Yeah.
consequence, so, yeah,
Yep.
I've heard many people chewing up a brownie and spitting it out because it had too much
Yep.
fat in it, right? And so I get it, and so if that's what you need to do, that's what you need to do, but I think it's also hard when you do go to a physician's office and you're handed a one-page handout about a diet, because with gastroparesis, it is a spectrum. There are people
Yeah.
who unfortunately can't eat anything by mouth, and then there are people who can eat everything, and they might have
Yep.
flares where maybe for a couple of days they have to cut back on their roughage or, their
Mhm.
raw vegetables. And so it's this
Yeah.
really big spectrum, and some people can move throughout the whole spectrum depending on the day. And so having a one
Mhm.
page or just one resource is not going to be enough. And I also find that
Absolutely.
if you go on the social media platforms where there are forums where people talk,
Mhm.
like Reddit and Facebook and things like that, you might see the worst of the worst on there, because the people
Yep.
who are in those forums are typically the people who are suffering the most and looking for answers, right? So if you go
Absolutely.
in there, you might think people with gastroparesis only have GJ tubes, can only drink soup,
Mhm.
right? So that's what you see. And in fact, that's what's so great about working with a GI dietitian, because
Mhm.
GI dietitians understand nuance and they understand asking questions about what feels good, what doesn't feel good, what's made you sick in the past, what sits well with you, and building a diet around that based on the
Mhm.
person. And then having, like you said, when you have lows and things like that, having tools for when your blood sugar drops or when you can tolerate more fiber or maybe how to add more fat into your day and
Yep.
how to do those things safely and healthfully for you.
Mhm. I wouldn't have been able to add some of the things besides the medical interventions, medicine and treatments and things like that, and operations. Like, I am a success story with the GPOM. I've talked about that a lot in a lot of different spaces here, and it was really helpful, but it wasn't everything. And it really, again, isn't until I got into a conversation with a dietitian who understood all of these things, who understood how difficult it can be and how isolating it can feel to be at events and not be able to eat anything or feel uncomfortable in that space, and how your emotions and your attachments to food or situations can make that better or worse for you. And I
Hmm.
remember one specific time with one of my dietitians, because I see two of them. She asked me, like, what foods do you enjoy? Like, what do you like? What
Yeah.
what tastes good to you? What things do you miss? And it was like, okay, so if you want chicken and maybe just eating, regular grilled or fried chicken or any of that kind of stuff, maybe let's try some canned chicken. It's
Mhm.
softer, it's a little bit easier, it's easier to kinda chop it down, there's less fat in there, like, let's try that first and see how you do, And then if you do well there, can we make it taste the way that you want? Can we make it the texture that you want into the meal that you want? And then if you feel comfortable, let's move up to the next thing of different, consistencies and textures
Right.
and what have you. And I'm like, I never ever would have thought of doing it that way if I hadn't been in a room with someone smarter than me.
It's not the smart, it's we have training. It's
Yeah,
I mean, yes,
it's the
I'm smart. No, I'm just kidding. But it's the training, and I think that's what's
Yeah,
important to know. Like, I'm a
yeah.
certified specialist in digestive health. Right,
Mhm.
I have those letters after my name, and part of that is knowing how to treat people with different disease states in the GI
Yep.
space. There are
Mhm.
dietitians that are sports dietitians, diabetes dietitians. They may not, well, the diabetes dietitians may know, but there are many dietitians that have never heard of gastroparesis, just as I
Yep.
might not know, what's going on at the hospital level in a cardiac unit, right? And we
Mhm.
do have specialties, and so finding a GI dietitian when you have gastroparesis could make all the difference, even just a couple of visits
Yeah.
to build out, like, what would it look like to eat a certain way when you have good days and a certain way when you have bad days based on your taste. I would never hand out a meal plan. I don't do meal plans. That's not what I do. But I will sit with you
Mhm.
and brainstorm based on what you like,
Mhm.
food choices for each meal and snack, based
Mhm.
on where you're gonna be, if you're on vacation or if you're
Yep.
traveling, or based on if you're home, if you go to school, if you're on a college campus, right? All of those things, and really make it based on your lifestyle, and that's different for
Mhm.
everyone. So, it's
Yeah.
important that you go to somebody who sees you as an individual and
Mhm.
can help you work through what foods are gonna be best for you based on what kind of day you're having.
Yeah, and that's so important, to try to do that individualized care because I've said this before and I will say it until it changes that almost every single person that I have talked to has walked out of their diagnosis appointment or some GI appointment with just a piece of paper and said, like, here you go, this is what you can and cannot do, or go to this website if you have questions, or one time for me, someone was like, "Go to G-PACT." I'm like, "Do you listen to anything? Like, why are you recommending that to me? Like, did you put" and I just kinda walked out of that appointment like, I feel like I've never been seen here because
Mhm.
that just tells me if you didn't hear me talk about that part of my life, what else could you have missed when I'm telling you something and then when you're recommending different things? So, seeing a dietitian, having these conversations, getting that nutrition education is just so important. And I'm so glad that we've been able to do this and share different perspectives on like the same topics or similar topics and getting them from different GI dietitians because you all have had similar training and similar experiences, but it's been different every single time, which gives our audience and our patients different options and different ways of doing something.
So,
Yeah.
um, working with somebody who you trust is important, and building that trust
Mhm.
might take a little time, but I don't know one GI dietitian that does not have their whole heart in this. And it's most
Yeah.
likely because either they have a GI issue or someone they
Mhm.
love in their family had a GI issue, and that's why they're in this space.
Yep, and that's the same for all of us here too, that, like, I got involved in this organization because I have the disease, so when we have other patients that come in, they're like, "Oh, I didn't realize, like, or you have this too." You can understand to the best of your ability what I'm going through, and I think you're right, like, everybody that I've talked to is just so passionate, and they just really wanna help more people, and then even utilizing like your social media platforms not just for clout but to really reach more people and to say like here's some like evidence-based information. Here's I'll shamelessly plug your book that recently came out in the last few months. You put your heart and soul into a book, into a piece of education that the patient can take for themselves to learn on their own time in their own space and say maybe these are things that can help me going forward. And we just appreciate all of that information being put out there because we really might not be able to get it anywhere else. Some people they can't get a dietitian covered under insurance, or maybe they don't have anybody around them that they could see in person. The person they want to see maybe doesn't do telehealth. There's a whole plethora of reasons why they might not be able to see somebody. So for us, these conversations are even more important because while we can't provide the patient community with individualized nutrition care, we can give you places to start. And it also can give people places to look to find dietitians and know that GI dietitians exist because I'm still salty that I did not know that for all those years until like last year. So,
Yeah, it's amazing how many patients I see on a daily basis who, when I
mhm,
ask them, "Have you worked with a GI dietitian before?" they say no. And
mhm.
I will tell you probably 1 to 2% of my patients say yes. And the
Wow,
rest are like,
that's
"Nope, never
crazy.
did, never have," or "I've worked with another dietitian," or "They referred me to the dietitian in the hospital, but she didn't know what to do."
Mhm.
Right? And that's
Yeah.
why I think it's important. And, thank you for shamelessly plugging my book, which is called Gut Goals. It's for IBS, not GP, but
Mhm,
if you have IBS too, certainly you can read it. But that's, and I'm going to shamelessly plug Oshi Health right now because what I love about it and why I started working with them, not only are they weight neutral and GI focused, but
mhm.
they're accessible. A lot of insurances
Yes.
cover them, a lot of employers cover them, and you have access to a dietitian there, and we're all
Mhm,
GI dietitians. So,
mhm,
it's amazing how many people come in, feel better, and go on their way,
mhm.
and it's so great to watch. And then when the cases that come in that are difficult, we're a team. We have advanced practitioners that are on the team that worked with us. We have gut brain specialists that work with us. So it's this whole GI team that sort of works together to say,
Yeah.
let's see which piece isn't working right now, and
Mhm.
in the gastroparesis space, and see if we can figure it out. And so,
Yeah.
I hope that more patients will have access to GI dietitians. But you're right. If they don't, I think looking for GI dietitians to follow, or
Mhm.
to read their blogs or Substacks or whatever they have, is probably a better choice than going to Dr. Reddit or Dr. TikTok,
Yeah.
getting the information there.
Yeah, it's so wonderful to see the accessibility and just all that information, and I know that as I was looking for something and that's how I started coming across all these dietitians, it's like I'm looking for something and then I see one and then it brings me to another and another, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, there's so many of you out here. This is wonderful." Like, "Hi, hello, my name is Sam. Would you be interested in helping our community?" Because gastroparesis can feel like it's long forgotten about too. And when things don't get updated quickly, we don't get a lot of options medicinally, that going down the road nutritionally is a big deal. And it can be really helpful. And it's something that we can control, but we need the education as a patient to make the best decisions we can for ourselves. We can talk about smoothies all day, right? And you can say, or even me as a patient, I'm like, listen, I've been drinking smoothies and I still feel terrible. And you're like, well, what did you put in your smoothie? And I could rattle off some ingredients. And I think I'm making the healthy choice, but instantly you might pick up on one or two ingredients that could be bothering me. Like if you Google like healthy, green smoothie, people might be putting chia seeds in it.
But it's healthy again, right? It's that
But
word, like, who's it
correct.
healthy for?
Exactly. But if you don't have the understanding or the education and you're just like, well, this is healthy and it's a smoothie, so let me make this for myself, not
Hmm.
realizing that some of those ingredients might be harmful to you, that's where having somebody to help you figure that out, and you don't necessarily need to see a dietitian forever. Like
No.
I am so firmly attached to both of mine that I'm like, you're stuck with me forever, but
Yeah, but for the
you
most
might
part,
not
it's a
need
couple of
somebody.
visits. It's a
Yeah.
couple of visits, and then maybe if you're having a really rough flare, then you check in
Mhm.
again. But it's really creating your own toolbox and then going
Yeah.
with it, and figuring out how to advance texture if it's possible and you want to.
Mhm.
Like some people just like pureed food and they eat it for a long time, and others are like, no,
Yeah.
no, I want to get to shredded. I want to get to soft. I want to get to chewing. I want to get to, you know,
Yep.
crunch. I want to get to that. And those
Mhm.
are things we can certainly work toward. And if they're doing well, then yes, we advance. And if you have a bad day, we back off. But you have the tools for
Mhm.
all of those kinds of days.
Yeah, and it's just so great, and I'm just so glad that there's so many more options now, and I think back to where I was, I see people in the groups like you were mentioning before, a lot of us who are in these groups online are because we're looking for something. Maybe we're looking for answers, maybe you're looking for someone with a similar experience, maybe you're looking for a physician, a support group, etc. I could go on. But we're usually looking for something because something is hurting.
Mhm.
And it's very easy to feel like that's the only possibility is hurt or maybe not feeling better or that you will end up on a tube. I remember thinking immediately joining groups like over a decade ago where I'm like, I'm gonna end up on a feeding tube. And at the time when I said to a doctor, like, no, that's not like guaranteed. We're not there yet, but
Right.
that's all I had seen. Plot twist, I did need a feeding tube, but, it wasn't guaranteed at the time, and I think really more talking about this and even, I know talking about the different textures and soups and juices and purees and trying to figure out, like since you mentioned fiber maxing before, it took me a not in this conversation, but I'm like, "What the heck is fiber maxing, protein looks maxing? What are these kids talking about these days?"
Right?
I'm like, "I don't even know," but, the idea of what is healthy and what we're trying to do and trying to educate and all these things, it's like, how do you know how much fiber works? We're told initially stay away from fat and fiber, right? Too much fat, too much fiber is not good for you with gastroparesis, which maybe that is accurate. But I know for me, I have a limit. I don't have a nut, like it's not zero. I have a limit on how I handle a certain amount of fat and a certain amount of fiber every single day. For a long time, I took a fiber supplement, but I took half a dose of that fiber supplement and that worked for
For
me,
you, right.
but
And
I
that's the
wouldn't
thing,
say
what
that
your
that works for everybody.
right. What your dose is isn't the dose for everybody. And some
Mhm.
people can't tolerate fat and they can tolerate all the fiber and vice versa. Right. So it's
Yeah.
really, really has to be individualized. And even when we talk about smoothies, people might have to start with juicing first, where they take out all the
Yes.
fiber
Mhm.
and so juicing is where, you put it through a machine that separates the juice or the fluid
Mhm.
from the what they call pulp, which is fiber. So you might
Mhm.
have to start that way to get the nutrients out of the fruit, and especially if you like the flavor of that. But then if you get to have some of that fiber and you use a blender, then you're getting to keep some of that fiber in the food, and that's the next step up, right? And then you can do it
Yeah.
with water or you can add
Mhm.
milk, right? And milk may have more calories. So so the maxing part, I would say when it comes to gastroparesis is like nutrient maxing, like so trying to
Mm,
get the
I
most
like that.
nutrients out of each meal or snack or drink or whatever. Um,
Mhm.
and again, that healthy word, out in the world where you don't have gastroparesis, water is the thing. Everybody's walking around with their water bottles. People
Mhm.
gastroparesis, you should not be drinking all that water. You're taking up space in
Mhm.
your stomach that could be filled with food or liquid nutrition, right? So, we
Yeah.
talk about that as like it's okay to drink your calories because it might be the only way you get them. Whereas,
Mhm.
like the healthy, don't drink your calories or don't drink soda or don't drink this or I want you to drink stuff with nutrients in it. I want you to get your
Yeah.
energy from liquid. I do not want you to sit there drinking 32 ounces of water a day because you're not
Mhm.
going to have room for food. Right. So
Yeah.
it is again going to be a challenge for some to get in some fluid. And for others, it's going to be the easiest way to get nutrients. But
Yeah.
nutrient maxing is, I think we should coin that term, right? Nutrient maxing
Yeah.
TM.
You heard it
And,
here
and
first.
right? And so you wanna try to make your food as nutrient dense as possible and still be able to
Mhm.
tolerate the texture and the load,
Yeah.
right? The size of the meal.
Yeah, and I know, like, I have my emotional support bottle here that I carry with me, but it's very rare that I actually get through that, because like you said, I would like to get nutrients from other places, but I also like I said about carrots earlier, I used to guzzle water as a kid. Like I didn't want
Mhm.
anything but like apple juice or like water and plain water. So I had trouble when I couldn't drink the amount of water that I wanted because for me it's like the taste, even though I know water really doesn't have a taste, the
It does.
refreshingness of it, really cold water as a kid, like I
Mhm.
loved it. Me and cold water don't get along now the way that we used to. So,
Mhm.
and it's the same thing. Like I sip on water throughout the day, especially when we're doing a lot of recording. You're talking, you're thirsty. But I also try to have a protein shake when I can tolerate them, but I'm a person with gastroparesis that can't just rely on liquids because that made me feel sicker. So I'm like, what can I pair with this liquid and this solid together that doesn't hurt my stomach and that I could do maybe slowly over time to not cause, like you said, too much space where I drink all of the liquid and now I feel a little nauseous because I had too much of the liquid, but I'm too full and now I can't put the solid in there and I just have to wait till it passes. That's not fun either. But it took me
Right.
some time to figure out what I was feeling and what was causing it and what I needed to go forward. And none of that happens without understanding your body, being self aware, which some of that is on us as a patient and as a human to really say, maybe I need to track my symptoms. Maybe I need to be a person who tracks my food.
Yeah, and keep your logs simple, and I
That's
think it's
interesting.
really logs, I think, are a place to gather information and collect
Hmm.
data where you can then compare your symptoms with your intake and see if there's a correlation between what you're eating and what you're experiencing and figuring out
Hmm.
what feels good in your body and what does not feel good in your body, and then allowing the dietitian to say, well, maybe if we shift this to this or substitute this for this. It's like, okay, you just said like the cold water doesn't sit well with you. Well, you can get
Yep.
room temperature nutrition beverages. They do not have to be cold, right? I've
Hmm.
had people heat up their Boost and drink it like hot chocolate. You know,
Interesting.
that's an
But
option
if
too,
it
right?
works,
If it works, then it's you
yeah.
know, and it is. I mean, your body warms up food to body temperature. So if you're helping
Hmm.
it, if you're helping your stomach do that by drinking warmer food, great. And some people
That's
that
so
doesn't bother
smart.
them, so they don't have to do it.
That's so smart. Every once in a while, I'm like, someone says something, I'm like, what? You're right. Like if I'm putting it in as really, really cold and my body has to heat it up anyway, it's like I'm giving it a little bit of a break if I'm, not putting in that ice cold water anymore, or that really heavy amount of ice cold water. That's
Hmm.
really interesting. I love when that happens because that'll sit in my head for a
You had
little
an
while.
aha moment right there.
I
Yeah.
did. I did. Um, but it really it's just everything is so nuanced, and I think that, again, not to continuously repeat it, but I think it bears repeating that that one pager is just not it for all of
It's
us,
not,
and,
no.
you know, if it took a long time for me to even get in with any dietitian, and I had to ask for that. GI dietitians are very vocal and you're great advocates for being in the space and say, "We're here. Hi, please utilize us. We can be very helpful." And the more that you guys are out there, the more patients are aware of you. So we can ask and ask to say, "I want to see a GI dietitian. I want to be connected to this person." And the physicians can say, well, this isn't my lane, but it's close to my lane. So
You
how
hope
can
they
we
say
do
that.
this together? Yes.
Yeah,
We hope as we go forward, but I think the
right.
more dietitians in the space, the more vocal that we as patients are, the more aware we as patients are for what's available to us will only further help us get to where we need to be. Because living with digestive disease as a whole, whether it's IBS, IBD, gastroparesis, all of the above, it's difficult and it can make life really, really hard and isolating and exhausting. So if there are options out there to make it less exhausting, we should be able to have access to those and make the choice ourselves if this is the right space for us. So,
And again,
yeah.
it doesn't have to be a long-term commitment. It could be a couple of sessions just to start to develop what feels good for their body,
Yeah.
and it's not like you have to go to the dietitian weekly for years. That's not how it works.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that might be some of the assumption too, just because if someone's never gone, they think it's very similar to your physician's appointments, and maybe for a little
Mhm.
while it is. I know when I was on TPN and tube feeds, a little different dietitian conversation there, but we updated every week based on where my labs were, where my nutritional status of what they were measuring, my weight, how I was feeling, all of those things were, so it was a little bit more intensive for a little while. And then, as I got a little bit stronger, we backed off a little bit and a little bit and a little bit. And we just kind of reworked a lot of that conversation until when I finally got off tube feeds and I said sayonara to that because I was tired of throwing it up. I, worked
Mm,
with other dietitians to get me to where I am now, and it's not a perfect system, but as I started to decline, I was like, "Hey, hi, hello, can we have a conversation?" And it really helped me be a little less, like, scared going forward of, "I'm in a complete decline, I'm gonna end up really, really sick again, I don't know what I'm gonna do, I don't wanna go back, I don't wanna go on TPN, I don't wanna be put back on a feeding tube," and it's like, "Alright, well, let's try these things first and see where we're at," and
Mhm.
I'm just really grateful to have that support. So I want everybody to be able to have some of that support so they can feel a little less scared in what's happening and just feel more supported.
I agree with you
Uh,
wholeheartedly.
but thank you so much for this conversation today. It was really great, and I'm very hopeful and pretty sure that everybody's going to get take away some great things from this. You had so much good information, and we are officially going to dig into nutrient maxing for the rest of this,
TM,
and
that's trademarked.
for all of our conversations going forward. And I'll make sure to put your information. And if anybody who does have IBS or is interested in your book, I'll make sure to link that information in our description as
Nice.
well.
Great. Well, this was
Thank
a
you.
great conversation. So thanks for having me.
Mhm.